Breaking news out of the NFL this afternoon. The Indianapolis Colts are trading Carson Wentz to the Washington Commanders for a package including mid-round draft picks. That's been confirmed by our senior NFL insider, Jonathan Jones. Wentz now moves back to the NFC East, where he will face his former team, the Eagles, team that drafted him back in 2016. He's going to face them twice a season now. The deal comes almost a year to the day when Philly sent him to Indy. Now, Wentz faltered down the stretch in his lone season for Indy, culminating in a loss to the lowly Jaguars in Week 18 that kept the Colts out of the playoffs. So there were the trade details. Got a second-round pick, and then I saw that in there for Carson Wentz. Dave Richard, we're going to talk fantasy impact. Dave Richard joining us alongside senior fantasy expert Jamey Eisenberg. Dave, yesterday, and Jamey, when we had the Aaron Rodgers situation, and then we had, of course, the Russell Wilson trade, my phone blew up because my fantasy guys were all over it. Today, nothing at all when I texted them about Carson Wentz. So, I mean, give me your reaction to this trade from a fantasy perspective. I mean, based on what I've seen, it's not overly exciting.
I guess you didn't have McLaurin or Pittman on your fantasy teams, and maybe you didn't have Antonio Gibson or Jonathan Taylor on your fantasy teams either. Look, I don't think anybody's going to be excited about Carson Wentz outside of 2 quarterback leagues. And him leaving Indianapolis leaves a pretty big hole at quarterback there. We've got to see how they go about replacing him and what that means for Michael Pittman. For now, it means terrible things because there isn't a good quarterback there. And if it stays that way, Pittman's a no-go, and it's going to make it a little bit harder on Jonathan Taylor, even though, honestly, the difference from Carson Wentz to a below-average quarterback, I don't think it's that far apart. But that's what Washington had last year. They had a below-average quarterback in Taylor Heineke. This is an upgrade for Carson Wentz. It's not a big one, but I still think it's good for Terry McLaurin. He was about a full PPR point behind Michael Pittman on a per-game basis last year. I think he gets right back to that mark, right around 13, 14 PPR points per game. I think it's okay for McLaurin. I like him as a top 24 fantasy receiver. I like him better for now over Michael Pittman. And I do think this isn't bad for Antonio Gibson. As long as he stays healthy, Wentz has gotten the ball to running backs in the past. I think that Gibson can be okay. Still somebody that you're going to look at as a top 15 fantasy running back.
Washington says we're going big at quarterback. Going to try and get Aaron Rodgers. Doesn't work. Going to try and get Russell Wilson. Doesn't work. And you settle for Carson Wentz. Just an unfortunate situation for Terry McLaurin. I was hoping to see him end up with someone who is going to be a significant upgrade over Taylor Heineke. So Wentz will keep Terry McLaurin in the number 2 receiver range. That's fine. We have to see what else they do at the receiving corps because I don't think Curtis Samuel is the answer as the number 2 guy there. I hope they use him actually more like the 49ers did with Deebo Samuel, like Samuel was once upon a time in Carolina before going to Washington. Hopefully Samuel stays healthy, but we'll have to see what the rest of his receiving corps looks like. Look, Carson Wentz is probably going to be a stopgap. Wouldn't be surprised if Washington still goes into the draft pool and gets another quarterback for the future because Carson Wentz clearly not that answer. And the investment is not that big. You know, two third-round picks, potentially becoming a second-round pick. So we'll see what ends up as a long-term solution here in Washington. And then you're already hearing rumors for Indianapolis that they're going to go after Jimmy Garoppolo now. So we'll see if that's an upgrade over Carson Wentz. I would say it probably is based on how Garoppolo has played. Hopefully Frank Reich and the coaching staff there can turn Jimmy Garoppolo back to what we saw earlier in the San Francisco tenure when the 49ers did allow him to throw a little bit more as opposed to being more of a game manager. So to be determined on what happens with Michael Pittman, we'll see. They're talking about maybe bringing back T.Y. Hilton. We know they just lost Jack Doyle. So there's an incomplete right now in Indianapolis. Terry McLaurin, I don't think is really necessarily a loser based on where he was last year, but he's definitely not a winner by getting Carson Wentz.
So in terms of Jonathan Taylor, because depending on how things shake out with Indianapolis, as you said, Jamey, with their quarterback situation, does this actually give a little bit more in terms of Taylor having to shoulder more of the workload based on what we've seen so far?
Yeah, I don't know if he was going to shoulder more of the workload no matter who the quarterback was. He is the catalyst of this offense. So as long as it's not what they have currently on their roster or they go into, just an absolute tailspin at quarterback, and again, it has to be somebody significantly worse than Carson Wentz. So Jimmy Garoppolo would be fine. If they go get, a Mitchell Trubisky or somebody of that caliber, Taylor will be fine. It's going to be something that's really, really terrible to take Jonathan Taylor after that number 1 overall spot in most fantasy drafts. So I'm not moving him. I don't love the situation right now, but again, it's still an incomplete until we find out who the quarterback is there. If it's a rookie, if it's a Jimmy Garoppolo, if it's a quarterback of that caliber, then Taylor will be fine. But if it's somebody that's a significant downgrade from Carson Wentz, then maybe Taylor could be in a little bit of trouble. But he's still going to be a first-round pick no matter what.
There's still one big edge that Jonathan Taylor has over almost every other running back in the National Football League, and that's the offensive line. And yeah, they've got to find a new left tackle in Indianapolis, but that interior offensive line is still one of the best in football. That's going to help the next quarterback that goes there too. Wentz benefited from that type of pass protection when that line was healthy in 2021. So I think Taylor will still be in a good position because of that offensive line to be that #1 fantasy running back. And if it is somebody like Jimmy Garoppolo, we've seen run games do pretty well with Jimmy Garoppolo under center. I would imagine it would be the exact same thing in Indianapolis, and I do think Garoppolo would be a bit of an upgrade. By the way, that offensive line in Washington, not quite as good, which means that Carson Wentz and whatever he can do at quarterback, I don't know how long he could end up doing it for, because that line could get him in some trouble, and we've seen him get beat up through the years.
Our two fantasy guys, Dave Richard and Jamey Eisenberg, joining us to discuss the trade of Carson Wentz going from the Indianapolis Colts to the Washington Commanders. Thank you very much, gentlemen. And of course, they'll be talking about this on Fantasy Football Today, breaking down all aspects of this trade, what it means for Indy, what it means for their fantasy players on that team. If you've got Jonathan Taylor, if you've got Michael Pittman, there might be some concern there for you, and how it all breaks down for the Commanders. You can download and follow Fantasy Football Today. You can also watch the show on YouTube.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.